I'm so excited to be here with U.S. Representative Conor Lamb. Representative Lamb, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Everyone in my family and on my staff is healthy, and we're at work trying to take care of the people of our district.
It's wonderful, all of the things you have been doing and continue to do. Tell us about your background. I gather you're at home right now?
That's right. I'm at home. I'm at my dining room table, I guess, and mostly just been spending all my time here, especially since we voted on the most recent bill about 10 days ago. I was obviously in a big crowd in DC to do that. And although I have always felt healthy, it seemed like the prevailing wisdom after that was to spend as much time at home as possible. So I've mostly been home here in Mount Lebanon, try to do what I can from here.
So I want to ask you about that CARES Act in just a little bit, but if you would say just a little bit more about how this has really changed, how your offices, how your staff, how Congress is operating right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's changed a lot, like it has for everybody. So what we've had to do, and we had to do it pretty early, was close our 3 offices here in the 17th district, and obviously close the office in Washington. But what we've been able to do is basically still function like a congressional office without having the kind of storefronts open. And so if you were to call our office right now with a question about COVID-19 or even a question about some pre-existing Social Security issue or something that you had, someone from my staff would answer. I mean, the phones are going through to their cell phones, and they're really able to do most of the things for you that they were able to do when the offices were still open. And then for me individually, I'm kind of part of a lot of discussions with other lawmakers in Washington about what's going to go into each round of legislation that we do. So it's a little different than normal, because normally we'd be in Washington holding hearings on these topics, inviting in experts and doing it all publicly. Right now, at least, it's a little bit more being done kind of by conference call. And we're exploring ways to do some public hearings over the internet, but we haven't quite got there yet.
Yeah, and particularly with the challenges with malicious actors trying to make their way into many of these technologies. I imagine it frustrates those who are trying to use it for good work. How are you finding it? How are you staying connected with your fellow legislators, trying to work on some really important things across a great distance?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we can do a lot from far away, especially younger members. We're pretty comfortable with the technology and working from far away. But, I still believe there is kind of an old-fashioned quality to politics that requires people to be around each other in person. There's still a lot of like backslapping and joking around that happens in Congress among members that have been there for a while. And there's a certain chemistry that you wouldn't pick up just watching cable television or something, but it's there. And I think losing that means that over the long term, as the debate about what to do, may become a little tougher or more partisan, it might make it a little harder to get some compromise on key issues. That's my fear. But so far, we've been working through it okay.
So an area of great compromise was the CARES Act that I imagine that's what brought you to DC to vote upon. Tell me a little bit more about it and what went into its creation, what you're really excited about and think will be helpful, what other things might have worked their way in as a compromise that carry less enthusiasm for you and for our district.
Okay, yeah. The CARES Act was really the first major attempt that we've made to try to get people some economic help in addition to medical help. We had passed a couple bills before this that were designed to meet some of the immediate medical needs, put money behind research for a vaccine and treatment, and putting money behind making testing free for everyone, for example. But the CARES Act kind of took that and multiplied it by a lot. And so it created a fund of $100 billion that they were calling a Marshall Plan for hospitals, to pay for all the treatment, salary, staffing, equipment that they're going to need for this. It created, I think, about a $350 billion fund for small businesses to access, mostly in the form of loans, but some of those loans would be forgiven if you use it on payroll for the next 8 weeks or so, with the idea that we want businesses to maintain their current staff. So obviously we want people getting paychecks, but also we think that Small businesses especially can be a little bit like sports teams. You don't want to break up the chemistry and the rhythm that people have with each other. And so trying to keep these businesses together is a goal of ours. So that was really a new thing that's never been done before. There was a separate $500 billion fund under the direction of the Secretary of Treasury, which is similar but geared toward larger businesses. So ones with more than 500 employees. You asked about compromises. That was a compromise. It's not that Democrats didn't want to help larger businesses. It's just there's always this debate about if you're going to give government help to large profit-making businesses, how many conditions do you put on that help? And there was a lot of, I think, looking back to 2008 and the financial crisis when the banks all got bailed out, and a lot of people saying, we didn't really put a lot of rules on them back then and make sure they did the right thing for the public and not just for their own bottom line. And so that was a lot of give and take this time about whether there were enough conditions placed on large companies. Some people feel there weren't. My attitude was kind of that time was a factor, and we didn't really have the luxury of a lot of time to debate and hold hearings and really fine tune this stuff. We kind of had to just do a little bit of what everyone wanted to do and package it all as a grand compromise, which I think is how we ended up. So we ended up with like a $2.2 trillion bill with a little bit of everything. And then I think what we're going to do in the next month or two is be paying close attention to which programs worked out well, which are being executed well, which are being executed poorly. And then in future rounds of legislation, probably double down on the ones that seem to be working.
And that's exactly my next question to you. It is a time of great uncertainty out there in the world, with folks dealing with layoffs and furloughs, just an upending of life as we as Americans know it. What's next? What do you have your eye on for the next steps in a federal government response as you're just looking out past the immediate situation into a little bit longer horizon?
Yeah, well, first, I think it's important for us all to recognize that it is not yet time to look out past the immediate situation. So we are still going to be in a pretty grave and risky and unsafe state for the next month or more. And so I think what the next round of legislation is still going to do is double down on some of the basic kind of healthcare things that we've done in the first few rounds. And so things like putting more money behind masks and ventilators, things like trying to make treatment for coronavirus free, not just testing, but treatment, so that hospitals are getting paid, so that people, who wants anyone to be stuck with a lifelong medical bill or potentially facing bankruptcy because they got the coronavirus through no fault of their own, right? People could end up in the hospital for 3 or 4 weeks with this thing, and that's going to be an expensive bill. So we really need to do a lot of stuff like that. But then to your question, which is kind of looking at the economy beyond that, one important thing that I think people need to realize is that this debate that worked its way into the public about the cure being worse than the disease, in my mind, that was totally a false choice and just a really inaccurate way to portray the situation. So it's not like we have the luxury right now of only dialing down the economy a certain amount and reaching a nice, careful balance with the healthcare measures that we have to do. It doesn't work like that. The fact is that the strength of our economy in the next 6 months is going to depend on how serious and disciplined we are on the healthcare side in the next 2 months. And the reason for that is if you just think about the economy as a whole, it all depends on risk. It depends on entrepreneurs being willing to take risks. It depends on customers, consumers like all of us being able to take the risk of going out every day into a crowded environment and spending money with the hope that we are going to be making more money in the future so we can spend money now. It's all about sort of us gauging risk. And right now, everybody is basically afraid of contracting the coronavirus, right? So if you're an entrepreneur, you're not going to make some huge investment, build a new plant, open a new store, whatever, because you have no idea who's coming into it or when. Think about all of us. We're afraid to go down the street to the grocery store or the hardware store or get a haircut or go to a restaurant. And until you address that doubt in people's minds, the economy will be slow. So how do you address that doubt in people's minds? You're extremely disciplined for the next couple of months on social distancing. You put a lot of resources into healthcare so that the people who get sick get healthy, and the people who are caring from them don't get sick and spread the disease. And then probably the most important ingredient is we continue to improve testing. We still are nowhere near the level of testing we need to be at in this country. But in order to put people back to work, in order to reopen restaurants and reopen construction sites and that kind of thing, you want to be able to test all those workers so that everybody knows that they're healthy and they're not spreading the disease. That's how you'll reopen the economy, by giving people the confidence to know that it's safe out there for them to go about their day the way they used to.
I think it's a really important point. From a religious perspective, we've been talking about the power of saving human life and the idea that if one saves one life, it is as if they are saving an entire universe. And I think you're right. Until those lives are saved, there isn't a willingness to enter the economy to enable us to save it as well. It's an important perspective.
Yeah, that's right. And the religious perspective is an important one right now for a couple of reasons. But one is, it's a strange thing to think that the way you can save somebody else is to stay away from them. It's not like anything we've ever been prepared for. You think about heroes running into burning buildings and grabbing people and saving them and doing these like really active things. But right now, actually, the best thing that most people can do is stay home and stay away from the people that you think need your help, because we really just need to slow down the spread of this virus for right now. And so I think the religious perspective can help give some meaning to that, because one thing we know we all can always do is pray, and that there's this kind of invisible way in which we're all connected to each other. And so that might be something that people are able to do, particularly for all these people that are passing away, people that are dying of the coronavirus, which are now over 10,000. A lot of them are dying in hospital beds completely apart from all their family and loved ones, because they couldn't let anyone else in at risk of spreading the disease. And so I think the religious community especially can help kind of share the load of some of that by trying to pray and lift up these people who've passed away.
Absolutely. And if we're taking our religious responsibility seriously, we recognize it's a responsibility not only to God, but to our fellow human beings, and that we do have a tremendous amount of agency and power to be looking out for the most vulnerable and to ourselves be helpers. And I guess that's my next question for you. You've mentioned some things that we can be doing. First, staying home and keeping ourselves safe, and thus keeping others safe. What else can people be doing right now? What else would you encourage us to look at?
Yeah, I mean, I think on the really, I can't emphasize enough that the important thing to do is stay home. And it's hard to get people to do that, but it is something that people have to do. People can do other things too. They can, particularly if you have the luxury of being able to donate money, even a little bit. There is going to be a massive increase in hunger and sort of want for the basic necessities in our community. And already, if you've been following the news, you've seen that the Pittsburgh Food Bank has been hit really hard with long wait lines of people who've lost their jobs. I mean, more people have lost their jobs in the last 2 weeks than any time in American history. And we expect this week to be just as bad. And so there's now people with very little. And so donations to kind of the classic safety net institutions like the Pittsburgh Food Bank are really, really valuable right now. A lot of people don't realize this, but the food bank buys a lot of its food. It doesn't only rely on food donations. But that's another thing you can do too. Even right here, and I know a lot of your congregants live in Mount Lebanon, just right up here in Washington Road where I live. They are collecting food at Edie's, it's Eden's Organic Market, which is the gluten-free place up here. Particularly to bring things to the food bank that are gluten-free for people who have that allergy. And I know that there's other places around collecting as well, but I think thinking about the basic needs of food security for people that are losing their jobs is a good way for a lot of people to contribute.
Yeah, and you give me the great opportunity, and I'd be remiss as a congregational rabbi if I didn't give a plug to Jeff and Suzanne Weiner, who are running Eden's and who are
That's right.
a small business doing their best, not only to continue to provide food for those who need it within their store, but as well as in the broader community. But you're right, donating money is a way that we can keep ourselves safe while also enabling many others who are in need right now. We have a question from someone who is both watching us and also keeping an eye on the news and is a little bit disgruntled, as I certainly am, with what's taking place in Wisconsin right now, where they're not moving the primary by the looks of things to allow a safer way for people to be exercising their democratic right and responsibility. I'm curious, as you look ahead in this, are there things the federal government is considering or could consider, either for state to help with state level or to look at federal level elections when it might not be safe to come out of our homes in mass as we do?
There are, and it's already been part of the discussion in these rounds of legislative negotiation about trying to use federal grant money basically to get money to the states to pay for more mail-in voting and easier ballot access. We lost out in the last round of negotiations, just like the Democratic Party in Wisconsin lost out yesterday. This is an area where I'm going to sound a little bit more partisan because there is just a stark partisan difference in how we view this. The Republican Party tends to emphasize the risk of something that is just not proven to take place in real life, which is voter fraud. So it sort of sounds good in the abstract until you look at the evidence and you see that there really is almost no evidence of this taking place on a large scale. And particularly when you weigh that tiny to non-existent amount of evidence against the large amount of evidence we have that people's health is at risk if they have to go to the polls in real life. Especially anyone who's gone to the polls around here, and I think it's pretty similar in Wisconsin, you know that it tends to be the older members of our community that work at the polls, and they do that good civic duty of checking you in when you get there and tabulating the voting machines and all that kind of stuff. Why would we place those people at risk? I mean, why would you want your parents or grandparents to be more at risk just so that you can have an election in person instead of through the mail? And the reason for it, in my mind, is pretty simple, which is that the Republican Party tends to favor measures that decrease turnout, and the Democratic Party tends to favor measures that increase it, that allow more people to participate. And there's political strategy, obviously, behind both of those outputs. But I just think at the end of the day, if you resort to a neutral source like the Constitution, which pretty clearly calls for one person, one vote, not just some people, some votes, I think the right side is to try to expand access as much as we possibly can. And letting people do it through the mail is a pretty good way. Here in Pennsylvania, we're lucky. We have a new law that got through some kind of old-fashioned deal making that will now allow anyone to vote through the mail in any election that wants to. You don't have to have an excuse like you did before for absentee balloting. And the nice thing is you can fill out the application for it online. Before, you had to print out the absentee ballot application, mail that in, have it approved, and then get your ballot back in the mail. Now you can just fill out the application online and they'll mail you the ballot. For me, actually, I already did this. They even sent me an email updating me when my ballot is on the way, kind of like when you order something on Amazon or whatever. So it's an improved situation here in Pennsylvania. And the hope is we can get some federal money behind systems like that in other states around the country. But this is one of the most important states for November. So it's a good thing we're doing it.
I think you're right. And while there is, I am sure there is, as you say, a very large partisan divide here, the landscape has changed. We're living in a new world with new realities. And I hope that the preservation of health, as well as the preservation of the Constitution, wins out in this. And I wish you both strength and fortitude to continue pushing and to find those levers or leverage that you can to make all of our votes count.
Thank you. And I'll just add again, you asked what people can do. Your members who care about our democracy and want to be involved and want people to vote, you can look up the link to register for your ballot through the mail and start sharing that anywhere you can, anywhere in your Facebook, Twitter world, or among young people, however, TikTok or whatever it is you're using. Just share that link like crazy, because you can go on and apply now, and then you're set for November. Once you apply once, you're supposed to get the ballot every election after that. And so we can spread that word just as citizens, and we can do it all day, every day, as much as we want.
I feel like that is the message we should simply keep repeating and repeating and repeating now through June, as well as into November, to make sure that everybody here in Pennsylvania does. I received another comment on Facebook thanking you for everything that you are doing to help ensure PPE for our frontline workers, whether you're in a hospital, whether you're in the back of an ambulance, whether you're coming into contact with those who have tested positive or those who are asymptomatic but presumptive positive. Thank you for all that you are doing to ensure that our healthcare workers have what they need.
I appreciate that. And, you know, unfortunately, a lot of the people who are still carrying the burden for the rest of us every day, you mentioned people that work in ambulances, firefighters are another example. They respond to a lot of EMT calls. A lot of them had no masks, you know, very little in the way of this protective gear. That's something we need to look at and fix systematically. But right now it was glaring to see how people who did not work in hospitals but were still at risk really were unprotected. And it's a problem for them because they're doing heroic work and they deserve a lot more from us than that. But it's a problem, you know, just for our response to this disease too. You know, there was a lot of evidence in Italy and places like that, that these services, whether ambulance services or doctor's offices or hospitals, they actually became vectors for spreading the disease more when people were not protected like they should have been. And so people got sick and died unnecessarily that didn't need to. And so we've been trying to sound the alarm about that here in Pittsburgh, because thankfully we have the luxury of being a little bit behind places like New York, and we have a little bit more time to prepare. And it still is not done. I mean, it's not a pretty picture when you look at the government's response on this PPE, and it really reveals a lot about the way that a lot of this stuff gets made overseas now. And in a time of crisis, it's hard to get it back here. It's clear the national stockpile was nowhere near where it needed to be, and it had a lot of expired equipment that didn't work anymore. So we're all going to need to take a really hard look going forward at what it means to be a resilient and prepared society. And I think it's going to require us to get away a little bit from this kind of constant obsession with like the size of the government or how much the government is doing, which has been a kind of tired debate throughout my life so far, and think more about the kind of strength and resilience and core functions of our society, whether we're ready for all the unpredictable things that could happen in the future. So something like maintaining a better national stockpile and thinking more about kind of critical areas of manufacturing in this country, even if they cost a little more than doing it somewhere halfway across the world. We need to be prepared for more things like this going forward, because this won't be the only time.
Absolutely. Representative, I'm so grateful for your time today. Thank you for joining us in this virtual space. Thank you for all you are doing on behalf of your constituents here in Western Pennsylvania. We really need your voice, and you're doing amazing work. Keep it up. Stay safe and stay strong.
It's really nice to talk to you too as well, Rabbi. I'm very glad you're here with us now in the 17th District community, and I want to thank all of your members for joining in today and watching this, and just encourage you again to reach out to people, try to encourage them to vote, encourage them to participate. And like I said, our offices are still open in a virtual sense, and we're happy to help answer any questions or direct you where you need to go with respect to any problem that you're having, or even just take down your ideas for future rounds of COVID-19 legislation. We get some pretty good ideas that way, and we'd love to hear from you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.